I was loved well by the church. From birth through college, I was part of a Methodist church that was very small, and it was mostly my family, so of course they loved me. They had to. They didn't have a choice. And some other people from this small community. It's not even a small town. It's a township. Like, it was super small. In high school, my friends all went to the Baptist church, though, so I decided I'd transfer my membership there, which I think I was the first person in my family to ever do that, which meant that you didn't get to be buried in the cemetery at the church. So I really did break up the whole family. So, yikes. But back to being loved. I was loved well by the church. I spent my high school years with a regular quiet time schedule, choosing to travel for missions, interning at the church during the summers, and I definitely held on to my V card. You know what I mean? Like, my aim in college even said no spreading until the wedding. Anybody else? No? Just me? Okay. I was always the one that was chosen to pray in the youth group because I was told I had the spiritual gift of prayer. You see my halo? Yeah, it was cool. I was real cool. My goal was to be perfect, and I kind of succeeded according to the rules of the institution of the church. I checked every box that they put in front of me. Until I joined the staff at that same Southern Baptist church after college. I loved my pastor. He empowered me, believed in me, and encouraged me to get out of the Bible Belt and go to seminary and grad school in California. But the church politics, the deacons, the same people that I thought loved me so deeply showed me a side of the church that I didn't know existed. As a female, I was kept in my place. I was a director by title, and pastor was a non-negotiable. I was never made full-time on the books, even though I worked 50-hour work weeks. I was constantly in a state of confusion and feeling hurt. And the saddest part was, I believed him. How could a God that I gave so much of my life to not see me as valuable just because I was a woman? That was the first disruption I experienced. Then my college best friend came out as gay. I was disrupted again when the church told him that he, a divinity school student and a part-time staffer at a different church, wasn't welcome anymore. Next, I moved to LA and experienced almost 6 years of disruption after disruption after disruption, in a good way. Our seminary president, Rich Mao, was a very progressive philosopher and theologian at the time. And at our convocation, I remember he said that grad school for all of us would end just like every flight we had ever been on. He said, "Be careful. Items in the overhead compartment may have shifted during this flight." He wasn't kidding. The more I learned, the more I realized I did not know. As these disruptions, these moments of curiosity, waking up, learning, these pieces of destructive spirituality that just kept coming, I had a choice to make. I could feel angry and walk away from the whole thing, or I could stick around and sift through and keep what was meaningful. The easiest choice that I could have made would have been to walk away. But instead, after making a pros and cons list, tell me you're a 6 without telling me you're a 6, I chose the latter. Why? Because as messy and ugly as part of the church was and still is, I saw potential. You see, I grew up in an extremely imperfect household, and the church, the good, the bad, the ugly, it was what I believe got me through. No matter how many times we ran away from my abusive alcoholic parent, it was my constant. The church was where I found safety and some kind of sense of normalcy that I didn't have anywhere else. That place and most of those people that cared for me and supported me when I needed it most were special. Those silly VBS weeks are what connected me to friends and adults. Those mission trips showed me an entire world that was out there beyond what I'd grown up in. Those summer internships revealed to me the importance of studying leadership. The daily quiet times taught me how to journal, and that it was good for my own heart and soul and mind. That grad school and seminary experience is what connected me to diverse people, brilliant professors, speakers, authors, and most importantly, it shined a light in me that I didn't know was there. But that didn't come without disruption and questioning and pain and growth. And that's what this series is about. Internally, I was an old house that needed a good remodel. I needed more than just some new paint, though. I needed to interrogate the abusive, anorexic, addictive, and distorted images of God that I had grown up with up to that point. Maybe you all have been there. Maybe you're there now. What are the questions that have stemmed from the disruptions, the speed bumps, the hiccups in your faith? You know, like, why aren't literal dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible? And why do we think it's cool for kids to learn about a mass murder of drowning a whole group of people? And what role did politics play in the Bible? And is there a heaven? Is there a hell? What's the deal with sex and homosexuality? What does it mean to be obedient or holy? And why the heck do Christians say everything happens for a reason? Honestly, if you haven't been disrupted about the strange things the Bible talks about, maybe you should come hang out in Greenhouse. They ask some of the best questions you will ever hear in your life. So many questions. But if we step back and ask these questions, we're considered by some to be radical, veering from the path and not embracing the mystery of God. Rob Bell said one time that the word radical in Latin is radix, which comes from the root word root. So the radical isn't necessarily the person who wanders off. The radical is the person who goes back to the source. It's the tradition that wanders off. The tradition of the church is what wandered off. The tradition has been corrupted by systems and institutions and greed and selfishness. So why do I still choose to engage and identify with this whole Jesus thing? Because the Jesus movement was birthed as a counter to the empire. It's a subversive movement that was about caring for each other. And I wholeheartedly believe that sacrificial love is how the world is made better, not coercive military violence. Today, we need to hear that more than ever. This place, the people in this space right now, you are here to figure this same thing out. Some are here building their house for the first time. Some of you are here remodeling. Some are trying to add pretty wallpaper to a house that's caving in. Some are in the demolition stage, the deconstruction. Some have already deconstructed and are ready to rebuild. And some are already rebuilding. And hopefully, all of us are building a house that's different from the one the institutional church tells us we must build. Like, we're talking one that probably won't meet code whenever we're done. And that's okay. I love this picture of people drawing boxes, and Jesus is going behind them erasing these boxes. This one picture to me embodies the heart of this series. Our hope and goal is to rebuild a spirituality that feels safe, sacred, and divine, not a spirituality of suffering, shame, and resentment. So where do we begin? I think we begin with our hopes and dreams and longings. What do we want our spirituality to look like, to feel like? How do we want to show up in this world around us? Respectful relationships involve both parties treating each other as a valued person. There's no devaluing. We long to be deeply known, understood, and loved. And we also long to know others deeply, to understand them, and to love them. This is possible only in relationships that are rooted in respect. In the first stage of rebuilding, we have to say no to gods that are not God. Gods that are abusive, gods that are destructive, founded in addiction of something or perfection, vending machine gods, chess playing gods, silent gods, shame-based gods. God sees our confusion, our doubt, and our distress as a growing spiritual humility that is a sign of our participation in life, our world, this kingdom. The second part of rebuilding is all about surrender. Ooh, it's like Mufasa. Ooh, surrender. Ooh. I know, I don't like that word either. This word is seen as a sign of weakness, struggle, being human. And that's okay. Some of us can surrender easily at a larger level. We know we can't really change the whole world. We're not that powerful. But surrendering in the ordinary realities of everyday life, well, that's the hard part. Whenever we observe ourselves growing anxious or angry or resentful, it's often a sign that we're trying to control something that's out of our control. Our anxiety, anger, and resentments are often reminders to us to surrender. Surrendering feels risky, though. We've had so many experiences that have led us to believe that maybe God's not safe. What if God abandons us? What if God's given up on us? We are gambling on the possibility that God's love is even real. The second step is to admit that there's a higher power. The second step in recovery, is to admit that there's a higher power and that we're not it. The payoff in the surrender is worth it. It's where we see our interconnectedness with all of humanity. It's where we develop a healthy awareness of ourselves. It's where our ego deflates and love takes over. Rebuilding is hard. It takes courage. It feels lonely at times. It feels like our whole world is just in pieces. There's a poem called Go in Pieces that was written by Padraig Otama during the pandemic. There's only a small part of it I want to read, but it speaks perfectly to what it means to deconstruct and reconstruct. It says, our concluding faith is being rear-ended. We're unraveling and are traveling to a place of new-formed patterns with delusion as a fusion of loss and hope and pain and beauty. So the task is ended. Go in pieces to see and feel your world. The process is worth it because that's what helps us to see and feel our world. This process is not about cleaning houses and getting them in order so we can be accepted or loved by God or others. This process is not about becoming holy enough to convince God that we're worth it. This process is about building something new on the promise that God is still with us. God is always with us, and we are worth it to receive and give love. Speaking of holy, that was one of your questions that someone submitted. This question of how do we reclaim the idea of holy or holiness? I think this is a perfect first question as we kick off this process of reconstructing or constructing our ideas around faith together. If we ask the general public what their thoughts on holy were, most would say that it's a form of perfection. 1 Peter and Leviticus, there's verses everywhere that say, be holy because I am holy. Sadly, holy has been used as a weapon in the religious world. And we don't have the time this morning to unpack every verse that uses that word, but I can promise you that holiness has been changed to be controlling and manipulative for some type of political or selfish gain. Holy is our ranking tool that we use to compare ourselves. It's the way that we organize our social hierarchy. Holy is how we justify devaluing others who don't fit into our ideas, our circles, or our boxes. When I study these parts of Scripture that mention holiness, they're typically about pursuing peace and rest and shifts from showing up in the world as the culture has told them they must do. Holy comes from the Latin root that means blessed. And in Hebrew, the word holy, or kadosh, is translated as sacred. Holy as sacred is an embodiment of the divine, the relation and interconnectedness of our universe, the deepest parts of who we are. That's what I mean when I say divine. What if there's no checklist or formula to be more holy? What if it's just being this beautiful combination of completeness of the divine and human? It's not an intersection because that implies a separation at some point, but an actual combination, like the two sets of DNA that came together when you were formed. I asked my 4th grade class this week to tell me what they'd invent, and they get really excited about their question because they get to use a whiteboard marker and write on the board. It's the little things. But one student said a baby maker and drew a very good picture. The picture might not have been what you think, but it was an actual machine that he felt the need to describe to me how it worked even. He drew this box, and then he said, on this side, one set of DNA comes in, and on this side, the other set. And then out of the top comes a baby. I said, awesome. Another kid said he wanted to invent a flying machine. I want to be there when he sees a plane one day. So, if we use this picture that one of my 4th graders drew to understand our divinity and humanity, divinity goes in on one side, humanity on the other. And then poof, we're holy. We did nothing except exist. We are sacred beings that love and seek mercy, selfless love, movement for the marginalized, and peace. What I'm trying to say to you this morning is that I think that our humanity alone is holy and sacred. To be human is to be vulnerable, to not know everything, to be misunderstood, to be tossed about, to carry each other through, to grieve deeply, and to be surprised. So clearly, there's a little bit of difference between divinity and humanity. Pete Rollins says that sacred and secular, though, tell us that we can fill that gap. And American culture tells us this. When they tell us that we can learn to conquer our limits if we just work hard enough, have enough money, buy enough skincare products, eat healthy enough, exercise enough, we might just live forever. The religious world tells us that we can be whole and live eternally if we just pray a certain prayer and ask Jesus to live in our hearts. We're told the lie that invisibility is possible. We live, we love, we die. There's no cure for being human. We all fall ill. We all get old. We all lose people. And I hope what you hear me say in this is that it's never going to be enough, but it still all matters. Every dream, every ambition, every job, every friendship, every bedtime story, every hug, every meal, it all matters. Life can be rich and real, and what we think will make our lives whole or complete is actually what makes it sacred and holy. We think we want to go to the happiest place on earth because it's perfect, unless you ask Donna O'Neill about Disney. But I can tell you, the happiest place on earth still has siblings that argue, parents that argue, and diapers that need changing. And those moments are the ones that set us apart as humans. We are dust, and to dust we shall return. Our humanity is beautiful and sacred and holy, and it's an opportunity to make creation a more beautiful, more just, more loving place for all. But instead, we typically spend more energy defending our value, our sacredness, instead of communicating it to the world around us. We are part of creation and made from dust, from common soil. Genesis says stardust, which astronomers tell us is the same soil that becomes watermelons and grain and apples and peanuts, and then that food becomes us. We are highly organized dust, but nevertheless, we are still dust. We share the breath of life, participating in the same life cycles of birth and death, reproduction and recycling and renewal. We are connected and related to everything, everywhere. We are good. We are image bearers of God, joining in on creative, healing work that is constantly happening in our world. This past week has been a hard week. Because we're all connected, we're hurting as we read about anti-trans work that's happening in Texas. A bully with a big army invading the Ukraine. The 10-year anniversary of Trayvon Martin yesterday. And the continuing exhaustion of COVID. This coming week, all of that continues. Plus, we step into a season of Lent, the 40 days of preparation before Easter. Fun fact, the Lenten season that begins with ashes on the forehead didn't even start out in the church. The Council of Nicaea decided they'd adopt that. And then Pope Gregory is the one that added the ashes and said, you can eat stuff on Sunday. But Ash Wednesday is not a day of obligation, nor is the season of Lent. Ash Wednesday is an opportunity to step back and take stock of these indispensable questions, remembering that life is too short and too fragile to waste. We are dust, stardust. And to dust we shall return. That's why you guys had a chance to pick up a small jar. In that jar, there's ashes and some glitter. I was trying to make stardust. And if you want on Wednesday, you can choose to add oil to that jar and make your own cross on your forehead to remind you that you are from dust. Or you can just keep the stardust to remind you of your connectedness and relation to our earth. This stardust is the foundation of your old house, your being, your core. Who you are is sacred, along with everything and everyone else. Our goal is to become different people on Easter than we are on Ash Wednesday. To do this, we must embrace our holiness, our marriage between the divine and humanity. We must take time, step back, and evaluate our patterns. Ask the hard questions and seek understanding. It will take active effort, intentional practice, and a supportive community. If you want to land somewhere different, pause, hold, resist. In the 1700s, Marie Durand was imprisoned in France in the Tower of Constance for 38 years for practicing her faith. During her long imprisonment, she used her finger to carve the French word resist into a stone block. It takes a long time to carve stone with your finger. So it is with Lent. Pause, hold, resist. We are dust, and to dust we shall return. And that is sacred and beautiful and holy. You are sacred and beautiful and holy.